let's. This first panel is back in the day. Bourbon Street was a lot different than bad T-shirt shops, strip joints, and people puking in the street. It actually had music clubs where you could go see bands, and French Quarter was a different beast. And then Jim Garrison, the various sources, kind of changed it through the years. But we have some people here to talk about. This panel is called Bourbon Street Parade, a look at Bourbon Street clubs in the 60s and even to the 70s. So we have as our moderator, this is Mr. David Kunian, who is an esteemed researcher who's produced award-winning radio documentaries. He's also in charge of the music at the Louisiana State Museum at the Cabildo. So he is, and Dave is also a writer who's been in many publications. David Kunian, everybody.
Thank you.
To his right is the man who usually is spotted playing the drums with Little Freddie King, but this man also started playing way back when on the CYO circuit, was playing with such people as Roger and the Gypsies back in the day and other bands up and down Bourbon Street at places like Papa Joe's. He played a year playing drums for Freddie Fender back in the day. This is Mr. Wacko Wade. And to his right, we have a true New Orleans legend. For every time I would, the first time I met this gentleman, I tried to hire him to back Earl King at a party, and he called me up. He actually said, "Can I come see the site?" And I was like, "Sure, it's a backyard." And he came, he looked, and then we talked, hung out, and then he forgot to call me back. He wanted to do the gig. So I thought he was like turned it down. He just then about a couple years later we met again when the Blues Estafette, and I asked about it. He goes, "Oh yeah, I forgot to call you back." But anyway, his bass lines permeate everything New Orleans. He's did countless sessions through the years on from Allen Toussaint from the late '60s, and of course he then had his little band called the Meters, which changed the face of funk, sampled to death. This man is, I've been seeing George Porter play bass since 1982, and I always loved seeing him, and I've always tried many times to get him to the Stomp, and it would always happen. I called him a few times, but like, man, they just called me and offered me all this money to go to this jam thing, and it was like, and it didn't work, but here he is at least to talk to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Porter.
All right. Again, y'all, Arab Padnos, the diabolical mastermind behind all of this. All this spouts out of that head. I guess I'll just start kind of with y'all with, just asking in the beginning, how did you start playing on Bourbon Street, and when and where and what kind of music? Whoever wants to go for it.
I'll go first. I think I started playing before George did. Back in the 60s, when desegregation came in, Bourbon Street was basically, it was full of vice. Jim Garrison came in and put vice squads in. They started a lot of raids and all and cleaning it out. In 1964, the street started taking in bands at different clubs. They had about 14 clubs on the street that just started having live music. And that was the revolution of really good music on Bourbon Street during the 60s. I'd say it's from 64 to the end of the 60s. And I first started playing on the street at Lestrada's. It's a little club on the corner of the 400 block. And my band was the Night Owls. Bunch of white dudes just looking for a gig. We used to play school dances and all. And we got this little break on Bourbon Street. We thought that was the biggest thing about life. We got there, and the guy said, "We'll give you $7 an hour." And I said, "Wow," because you could buy gas. You could buy 3 gallons of gas at that time for $1. So that was a good gig, So that's where I first started playing there at Lestrada's once in a while for Mardi Gras. I got a long litany of clubs that were popping at that time. It'd take a long time. But I guess there's 2 clubs that I played professionally that I enjoyed. One was the Playboy Club on Ivanhoe Street. I played there in 1967 for a year with the house band downstairs. They had a jazz group upstairs. Al Belletta and his group was upstairs, and they had like a pop rock band downstairs. And that band was called the Dead End Kids. There's just 4 of us. And we just did cover songs of anything that was new on the charts, soul, anything new, we would cover it and play it at the house. And so that was my best gig. We'd end about 12 o'clock, they'd have a brunch, and then I'd run down to Papa Joe's. I played drums at Papa Joe's for about a year with the house band. Johnny Panina was a sax player. They had Skip Easterling, they had Freddie Fender, just got out of jail. He was looking for a gig. And I played drums behind those cats. And a litany of R&B guys out of New Orleans used to come there to sell their 45 record. Back at that time, the 45 was the thing to have, and everybody had a regional hit at that time. And the list goes on. I played behind Rod Bernard, Skip Easterling, Alan Collet, Joe Barry, Eddie Powers, Stark Whiteman. I mean, I could just keep going on. But my favorite guy was Freddie Fender. Okay, Freddie, I played behind Freddie, and he played with the house band at Papa Joe's, and we get off stage, and he says, "Hey, Wack," he said, "I need a drummer. I'm putting a 3-piece group together." He had a Spanish bass player, him and me. And I said, "Okay, Freddie." So we go to this place. Our first gig is La Casa de los Marinos. And I go, holy shit, I don't speak Spanish. I'm in this, and it's really, I think it's Masparo's now, in the Quad, it's Masparo's. And it was a seaman's ball. New Orleans was a big port for seamen. And man, they used to have fights all the time in La Casa de los Marinos. And man, I'd be playing drums and bottles would fly. And I'd get down there and Freddie turned and say, "Keep going, man, keep going." So I stayed with Freddie for a while there, and then I moved on after, Freddie had just got out of Angola. He did like 3 years on possession of marijuana back in the day. He went to Baton Rouge, and they busted him for marijuana. And Jimmy Davis sprung him out of jail. And so he came down to New Orleans looking to work and all. I never knew all this history of Freddie. When he asked me to play drums, he was just another guy that sang real good, played guitar. And I started playing with him. Then I heard he had this little track record, And so this cop on the street, they used to walk the beat. And the guy told me, he said, "Man, I don't know if I'd hang out with that dude, I said, "Why?" I said, "He got busted on possession." So then I told Freddie, I said, "Freddie, I think I found another band I'm going to play with." So Freddie said, "All right." So then he got Lil Joe Lambert. Lil Joe Lambert was playing the street, and that's where he hooked on to Joe, and then they moved to Houston, Texas. And that's when it all started for him.
Yeah. George, how did you start? Where, when, what kind of music?
On Bourbon Street.
On Bourbon Street,
okay.
yeah.
Well, Art brought us from the nightcap to the Ivanhoe on Bourbon Street. I think the year was late '65.
Okay. And the nightcap was Carondelet in Louisiana?
The nightcap was Carondelet in Louisiana Avenue, yeah.
And where was the Ivanhoe?
And the Ivanhoe was on Toulouse and Bourbon.
Okay.
Or Bourbon and Toulouse. Get that right.
$500.
And that's the 600 block, isn't it?
I think it's 544 Bourbon. 544.
544 was across the streets.
Oh, it's
yeah.
correct.
So yeah, no, it's a 600 block. It was 601, I believe.
Okay.
601 Bourbon. But we went into there as a 5-piece band. It was Art Neville, Leo Nocentelli, Joseph Moderlis, and Gary Brown, the
Right.
saxophonist, and myself. We were there for, I've seen a couple of Christmases, maybe 3, I believe, something like that. We did our first recording in '67, and we were still playing on Bourbon Street when we released Sophisticated Sissy.
Okay.
I think we left maybe the following year, '68, when the booking agency, the management decided that we should go out and support these records that he was putting out, unauthorized records.
Yeah. Not the beginning of all that, but the middle period.
Yeah. Well, we were on Bourbon Street the night that Martin Luther King was shot.
Oh, wow.
And I remember at the end of the night, when we emptied out our tip jar, there was 422 caliber bullets in the bottom of our tip jar. It was like, well, you know, Gary used to tick people off, but they only put 4, so I think the 4 might have been us, and they was letting Art go. Right. I can never figure that out, or maybe just he wanted to keep 2 in his chamber just in case he needed them.
Yeah.
But it was kind of strange that night because we were all kind of like wondering, you know, what the hell we do?
Yeah,
at this point, you know, because Bourbon Street was, you didn't see many black people walking the streets of Bourbon Street in the late 60s. But there were tons of black musicians all up and down. I mean, all the clubs was rolling with black musicians. And I was doing actually 2 gigs. I was playing the Ivanhoe with the band that became called the Meters before. But also in '67, I was doing we would play an hour on, an hour off, and on that hour off, I would go up the street, and I can't think of the name of that club, and play with Johnny Vodakovich, and we would play behind strippers. Well, actually, they weren't strippers; they were shake dancers. Okay. They already came out with their clothes almost already off. So they weren't strippers.
It's an important distinction. Important distinction.
Yeah. So they were just shake dancers, and I would do like a 55-minute set with them, and then I head up the street to get back to the Ivanhoe.
Were there, since you say you were playing with Johnny back then, were there mixed race bands as well as? I mean, did that happen a lot too, or? You
know, one of the things. Well, Al Hurd had a mix. We had Ellis Marcellus in his band. I'm trying to think about. I know Frog wasn't in a mixed band. Frog was all black. Cousin Joe was all black. He wasn't a whole band, but just him and a trumpet player. You know, I think that Johnny and I might have been the first band to do that.
You broke the mold.
We didn't even think about it that way, you know,
right.
Because it was, you know, like he was saying that about Garrison had his henchmen back then. You know, certain things that you just you couldn't do. I mean, there was a law on the books called bee drinking.
Explain that.
Right. Where musicians that are playing on the street, we can't go to the bar and sit down and have drinks. We can't, in other words, we had to. In fact, the black musicians, they used to, the guy who we were working for, Johnny Cook, he originally had we used to go, after we get off the stage, we would go sit in the liquor room, which was a little, probably 8x8 room, stacks of booze, and we would sit on the booze cases waiting to go, and I don't remember what it was. Me and Leo liked to shoot pool. Mm-hmm. We used to like shoot. They had a pool hall across the street. So, we said, man, can we just go shoot pool? And Johnny said, yeah, man, y'all don't have to sit in that closet, and I said, good. We were out of there. I'm not sure what nobody else did, but Leo and I always would go to the pool hall across the street. And so that's where we would do that, and that was after, that was probably more like the latter part of 67, because the first part of 67, I was doing that gig with Johnny, but then that kind of dissolved. And I never knew why it went away, but it just kind of went away. No, I think maybe Johnny got the gig with Al Boletta, maybe. Okay. I think maybe that's what happened, because he might have moved to the Playboy Club. Okay. I think that was upstairs, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, the jazz upstairs? Group, the modern jazz group with Al was upstairs.
Yeah.
And they had a late show, and then they had a rock band downstairs in the main room. But to address George's point about the black and white issue of bands on the street at that time, my recollection, it was usually, your little white bands, and the brothers didn't come in. The Meters were really the guys that introduced pop music on the street and draw the kids in and the teenagers to come see these guys. And I kind of think they were, revolutionized the street as far as integrating other musicians. The traditional clubs like the Famous Door And the Dream Room and places like that had your traditional jazz bands. The Paddock Club had jazz. Then you had Dixieland. That was the two styles, jazz and Dixieland. And rock was just kind of nowhere on the street at that time. And with the onslaught of Papa Joe's and these guys that made these hit records in the 45s, the street started to get more live bands and all. And George's group. In fact, I used to take off and walk down the street. They played pretty late at night sometime, right, George?
Yeah, we would play until sometime 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
I'd take off from my gig, walk down there to go hear these guys. I couldn't get in the club. I had to listen in the street. Right, George?
Yeah, that was true. Yeah.
It was a very small place, and I was standing outside and listening to these cats hammer away. I never heard nothing like that before, because I'm kind of the R&B guy from the old school. One of my favorite stories about playing music was with Huey Piana Smith. My mother worked at WBOK with Okie Dokie back in the day. And I was playing a gig. And,
Okie Dokie the DJ.
DJ, yeah.
DJ Okie Dokie. And my mother called me and said, look, Okie Dokie said he needs a drummer to play this one time, this gig. I said, give me the address. So I took the address down and got in my car, put the drums in there. I had a 1955 Pontiac, and I loaded the drums. I go on Rampart Street. And I'm on Rampart Street, and Rampart Street is a brother street. Shoe stores, hock shops, pawn shops, ballrooms. It was jumping back in the day. Right, George?
Yeah,
Rampart
absolutely.
was the street.
Was the street.
So I'm going Rampart, and I don't know where I'm going, so I got the address, and I believe the name of the club was the King's Club on the right-hand side. I pull up to the club, and it's all brothers out in the street, and I said, huh. Back then, you know, it was segregation, and I wasn't allowed in that club. So I asked the guy, go in and see if Huey Piana Spit's in there. So they came out, and they said, hey, man, you're the drummer. I said, I'm sorry, dude, I'm a marshmallow. He said, come on in, man, we need a drummer. He said, come on, man, we need a drummer. So I played in there with the King's Club with Huey Piana Smith. He had made Rockin' Pneumonia, Boogie Woogie Flu, and that was a real hot record at the time. But that's my favorite story about Huey.
Well, that was one of the greatest things about, well, I mean, I'm not sure if it's great, but it was the fact that that some of the lead black musicians had on Bourbon Street that black people didn't. You know, I mean, you know, if it was a black person on Bourbon Street, they was either shucking oysters or they was in the back room, you know, cleaning, washing the pots and stuff like that. But as far as walking the streets, you know, they just didn't, you know, they didn't let that happen. It didn't happen, you know. And but black musicians, if you were a musician, you could walk Bourbon Street and not, you know, not get into any trouble. I remember a crazy story was that walking, I came to work that night, and I always would take the streetcar and get off, and then walk to the Ivanhoe, and I'm walking this night, and there was this. I'm walking and distracted by this beautiful lady coming up the street, which turned out not to be a lady.
That's the first time that ever happened.
First time it ever happened to me, and you know, and I just totally was distracted, and I walked straight into this post. Bam! I mean, I'm laid out on the ground, my eyes going. I think I really do see birds. You know, it's like, you know, and she stands over me and she says, "Are you okay?" You know, and I say, "Yeah, I'm okay." She said, "Okay." At that point, I noticed that she had a nice sized Adam's apple. And I said, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" You know, don't want to repeat that nowhere. No,
yeah. Y'all brought up Jim Garrison. Can you guys explain who he was, what he did, and kind of what the street was like before and after he did what he did?
Well, shot at it. I'm not a historian of any kind.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, I was 18 years old, or 19. But Garrison basically got into office as a district attorney, and he had this big hard-on to clean out Bourbon Street, the vice. So he created what they call the vice squad at the time that walked the street and busted hookers and busted beat drinking and whatever. And so it got that the girls and all were leery about working the street anymore. he ran the pimps out of town, so they started going to Dallas, and they started going to Las Vegas. So that's what really cleaned out the stripping industry. In 1964, I think it was, Downbeat magazine said that stripping in New Orleans is dead. And George can attest, so back in 1964 on, that's when the music started hitting these clubs in the street. But that was one of Garrison's deal of cleaning out the strippers. He went on later to, you know, make some kind of case against the assassination of John Kennedy, as I'm sure y'all all know, which fizzled out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, that thinking that at one time, Bourbon Street was safe. You know, I mean, during those years that we were down there, I can only remember like one incident happening. And that incident, it was like, it started and ended all within, you know, 15, 20 seconds. Right. You know, and because they had a serious vice presence, you know, that you just didn't allow any kind of foolishness from no matter what race you are, you know, any kind of foolishness didn't happen. All of the clubs down there, all of the clubs had like really bouncers. You know, they called them doormen for the political correct, but they were serious. These guys were like, would take your head off. Right. You know? Yeah. So you know, but I mean, the things that's happening on Bourbon Street today is like unbelievable. That kind of stuff didn't happen in the quarters back, in, you know, at least that we knew of. You know, now if it did happen, it was like I said, it happened, and it was squashed so quick that, you know, the neighbor next door didn't know it happened. You know, so you know, if there's a lesson to be learned there, you know, namely they should go pull Garrison's book out and check it out. I mean, I don't think Garrison was a friend of the black man at all. Right. You know, but you know, Bourbon Street was a pretty safe place to be in back in the late '60s. You know, definitely was.
One thing I like to say, going back to, you know, like I heard George say that when Martin Luther King was shot, that he was at the Ivanhoe, and I was playing at the Playboy Club that night. And when that happened, I called in. I said, "Are y'all going to have a band tonight? You want us over there?" And he said, "Yeah, let's just continue business as usual, you know." And it was a very solemn, you know, somber night. And I don't think anybody came in the club or anything, but they paid us just to be there, you know. It was a bad trip. But getting back to, you know, kind of like black musicians and white musicians, if you're a musician, it don't have color on it. You know, a musician is a brother that crosses the cultural, economic lines, and we all friends. We all friends. I could walk down Bourbon Street with the brothers, and they know I play drums. I know George. You know, it's just a union of guys that are musicians, first of all. You know, and the street was a jumping street back in the '60s. I want to address one thing real fast, and I'll let George take a little bit. They had a club on the corner of the 200 block. It's called the El Morocco. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I don't.
Okay. The El Morocco had Blue-Eyed Soul guys. The Jackson Brewery Company was the band. That was my favorite band because I knew Ronnie. Ronnie's name is Ronald Raymond Barriosi. That's Ronnie Barron, organ player. Ronnie Barron was good friends with Mac. Okay, he later went on to LA with Mac and those guys. Ronnie created his own music, became an actor now. But Ronnie's band, the Jackson Brewery Company, they had Jerry Juniorville on saxophone, and they had Eddie Hernan, they used to call him Zipper, on trumpet, and
Jerry LaCroix.
Who?
Jerry LaCroix.
Okay, Jerry.
Jerry McCoy.
There you go. There you go.
Right.
Man, what a band. You know, as a musician, I could appreciate, and I used to go there every chance I get. And Ronnie was a good friend. He lived over in Algiers and all. And Ronnie taught me how to buy clothes. Ronnie said, man, you got to go down on Rampart Street. They got a shoe store there. They'll knock your socks off. So ever since that, I've been buying these crazy wild shoes. And he has the same kind of style. He was the first guy to bring alligator shoes, snakeskin shoes. I said, Ronnie, where you get those shoes, man? Rampart Street.
Rampart Street, yeah.
Then I go to Wright Taylor's, I said, where you get that shirt, man? He used to have these French cuff shirts. Man, go down to Rice Taylor, man, right on the corner. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
But anyway, I wanted to point out the Morocco was down there jumping place, man. They also had, back in the early 60s, they had a place called the Hootenanny. When they had the guitar playing, they created a club called the Hootenanny. It didn't last long. Guys like Jimmy Buffett came from Mobile to play acoustic guitar by himself. Stephen Stills passed through town one night, or 2 nights, and played the club on his way to L.A., but it was Hootenanny stuff. It didn't last in New Orleans, because we strictly rhythm and blues. Yeah. We sent his Hootenanny ass west, The other club that was on the street was Johnny Rivers. Johnny Rivers had just started out, and he created Johnny Rivers Whiskey A Go-Go. That was a big club on the street. I played there with my band. He had a house band, and he would bring in guys from Baton Rouge. He would very seldom come play his own club because he was on the road and all. Yeah. But guys like Jimmy Clanton would come down from Baton Rouge, and he had just made a song. And Johnny used to try to have guest stars come in, and he lasted about maybe 2 years on the street, the Johnny Rivers Whiskey A Go-Go. So that's just to bring you up on some of the clubs.
Yeah, I like your notes.
I took my bullet, they call bullet notes.
So you're talking about the clubs. What were the club owners like? I mean, I assume there were a variety, but who were some of the club owners? What were they like? How were their business practices?
Well, from where I was at, we didn't. We were more in relationships with the managers of the clubs. Okay. Most of Bourbon Street was owned by one guy, or ran by one family, and we're not going to get into that. But excuse me, Johnny Cook managed the 544 and the Ivanhoe back in the late 60s. So and Johnny was good people. He was he kind of gave us leeway that some of the other guys that were down there didn't have. And one of the things that the law was, like I say, be drinking. It means that the club you were working in, you couldn't go sit at the bar. But we could go sit at the bar across the street at the Ivanhoe. Okay. I mean, we would leave the Ivanhoe and go by 544. While Frog was playing, we could sit at the end of the bar and watch Frog and them on stage, which we didn't do that whole lot, but every now and then I used to go check out Frog. I loved Frog, so I would go over there and see Frog, and they would sit at the end of the bar, and that was, that nobody ever gave me any grief about doing that, I remember going down there by Chris Owens' place. Yeah. And I can't remember the little drummer that she had with her back then. He was a little bitty short guy. Yeah. Great player, man. He was a serious player. And he got me in because the guy at the door didn't want to let me in. And he got me in the club, and he introduced me to Chris. And and I sat at the end of the bar, and that was the limit to where you can go hang. I couldn't go sit at a table, and then I sat at the end of the bar. But that was I kind of believe that the club managers was more, like I said, Now we knew Frank Curator because Frank Curator was a big fan of Art Neville from going way back, from Shaduki Do days, and Art was famous, more famous than most of us really knew at the time. But Art Neville was the man. He had hits. He had history. He had history, and when so when I started playing with Art Neville, it was like I was elevated, up a couple of steps, and it was like now I'm bad players, but then. Was one of the things that working for Frank Curator is that we were protected. Okay. We were protected. Our very first gig on the road as the Meters, We played in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Played for this black promoter, the guys from Alabama that got famous. Not Maurice White and those guys. What's the name of those guys? Was it Commodore? Not the Commodores. Yeah, it might have been the Commodores, or one of those kind of bands. They got really famous real quick. They kind of opened the show. It was them, then us, and then on the husband-wife team that didn't like each other. Oh God, I can't think of their names. That's what happens with your age. But anyway, at the end of the night didn't go really well for the promoter. So he kind of stiffed us on our money. So we all go back to the hotel, and we sitting there in the room complaining that that in fact the promoter was supposed to get us 2 hotel rooms. He only got us 1. So like we all sitting in this hotel room, and we complaining, man, I'm just gonna stay on Bourbon Street. I ain't for coming out here and getting screwed around like this, And somebody knocked on the door, and Art went to the door, and these 2 big, huge white guys, man, at the door, and they handed Art an envelope and said the promoter had a change of mind. And they just walked away. Art came in and he counted the money, and that was all our money. It was like, so we got home. Never gave it much more thought. And then about maybe a month later, I'm walking down Bourbon Street, going to my little gig, go down with Johnny, and I spot one of these guys. I say, whoa. It all came to mind, that Frank Curator had Art Neville back.
Yeah.
It was like, wow. He was protected.
How was the pay on Bourbon Street back then, in general, and also compared to other places that you played around New Orleans?
Around New Orleans?
Yes. Did you get paid more on Bourbon Street? Get paid
Oh,
less?
you mean the pay? I
Yeah,
didn't hear the pay
pay.
word. Oh.
The pay was terrible.
The pay was better. Yeah. I mean, like we were just talking to Dave about that earlier. Back then, I believe my take-home pay for 6 nights a week was roughly about $175, $180. And I never thought about what it broke down to for 6 hours. We were down there on the most part. It was supposed to be 4 hours. Basically, we played 3 hours because it would be a 6-hour window that between the 2 bands, us and now the other guy was Jack Ziegler, just a keyboard player. Mm-hmm. So it would be a 6-hour stretch. But then after Jack's last set, we would do the last set, and then usually by that time, most of the rest of Bourbon Street is starting to shut down, and all those people started hanging out there, all head. I mean, then most of it from after 1 o'clock in the morning, Ivanhoe was packed with other employees from all the other clubs on the street that had already been closed down, and so we would be down there until 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. So I mean, maybe it's 6 o'clock a few times. I mean, there's not a whole lot, but 5 o'clock. Almost every week we were down there until 5 o'clock.
Wow.
It was hardcore because the next 3 hours we would make more money in those 3 hours than we was making for the week.
Right.
And at one point, Johnny was kind of thinking about taking away the salary. And I said, no, bro, we need to. You need to keep our salary, bro.
Yeah.
It tips things on. It's not guaranteed,
Yeah.
But we would make
good money.
$500, $600 on tips almost every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night.
Wow.
Yeah,
How was pay for you?
My second gig was at Papa Joe's, and that started like 3 in the morning.
Okay.
We used to go 3 to 7. You walk outside, and the sun would burn your eyes.
Yeah.
The sun, you say, holy Moses. But you just stay in that smoky club for 3 hours, 4 hours, just playing. Yeah.
$5 a set.
Yeah, it was a rough gig, man. But I wanted to mention that La Strada, where Clarence Frogman Henry had a steady gig over at La Strada. This is on the corner of the 400 block. Back in 65 and 66, the Aubrey twins used to play over in there. Little Jerome and his brother, Tyrone and Jerome They were
Tyrone
really,
Jerome, yeah.
really nice guys. Popular in New Orleans, you know, they hit it good. And then they went out west with Mac, and Harold Baptiste took them out to the West Coast, and they signed with Epic Records and made one little record and all. But so that's how the street rolled, you know. The artists started coming in there, and it started becoming a music city, man. It was a great street, very popular bands are. Frankie Ford played around the corner at Lucky Pierre's. He had his steady gig around the corner. I went on tour with Frankie. WTIX, Jim Stewart used to have this rock and roll tour that would run the coast along Mississippi and all. And, you know, I was a drummer with Frankie Ford on that tour. And, but that's where you met all your musicians. Like the House is In. The House is In was on Royal Street. It was kind of off of Bourbon, but that's where Mac started. Mac started with Earl Stanley. And they started playing. That band was called the Skyliners.
I remember that.
The Skyliners. And Paul Staley played drums with Mac.
Jerry Steele.
Paul.
Paul?
Paul Staley.
Okay.
Yeah, Paul Staley is Freddie Staley.
Upstairs, older brother.
His older brother.
Gotcha.
Paul played drums, and Roland was a singer. Roland used to be with a local band, the Jokers, and had a great voice, one of the purest voices you ever want to hear. But he was their singer. He had Mac, and they had Earl Stanley on bass and Paul on drums. But it was called The House is In. It was right off of Bourbon Street. But they had a lot of action in the quarter as far as live music.
Was it mainly locals as an audience? Well, George, you were saying late at night it was like the service industry people and those folks. But during the more kind of regular hours, was it locals there? Was it tourists? Was
No, it was probably 90% tourists. You know,
Okay.
Local. I think the local people started getting aware of that late night thing that happened at the Ivanhoe. Because of the other, the street people saying, man, you need to come
Pass
down
the
for
word,
this, passing the word. I just did my calculations. We were getting $9.72 a set.
That's what I said, $8 a set. I got it.
It's only about twice that.
Yeah, that hasn't changed. That's the reason I asked what the pay was, because Bourbon Street is still notorious for paying horrible wages to the.
Yeah.
$25 a set.
That's unbelievable that happens. But I mean, I never ever thought about it, how much we were getting paid a set. I'm gonna turn that gig down.
Did the fact I was talking to someone the other day about how on Bourbon Street that the union was strong?
We was stronger then.
How did that affect things? How did that happen?
Yeah, I still
You got to have your
fun.
union card, man, to work the street. I found mine in my drawer.
Yeah, mine's still in my back pocket, I believe.
Every quarter, you had to go down to the hall and pay your little dues to work on the street. And they used to have bouncers on enforcers.
Oh, yeah.
They walk in the club. Say,
They walk in the club, say, where your card?
me
You ain't
see
got
your
your
card.
card. I remember Jerry Green used to come see
Yeah.
the black musicians. But I think he did everybody. He did. I mean, after the unions merged, Jerry Green. Yeah. Nick Tadden. Oh, yeah, I remember him too. But yeah.
Was that beneficial to y'all that the union
Well,
was
at
so
the time
strong?
it was.
Okay.
At the time it was. But I mean, looking at how much I was getting paid, they wasn't doing too much. And I'm not sure, because I used to always have my gripe with the union, just basically because even when they, even today, to some degrees, the unions, they make deals, to bring industry in, to help, like the television companies that's coming in, and all the movie people that are coming in, and they're using local musicians to play local musicians,
Right.
but they don't pay us as musicians. They pay us as actors.
Side guys.
Playing musicians. Which is like, 1/3 of what you would get if they called me up and hired me to come play a gig.
Right.
And then talk about they got you for 12 hours, to be seen for 35 seconds.
Right.
But the union's making those deals, and I mean, I can't say that. I can disagree with it. I can do that definitely. Now, if the city is benefiting from it, then okay, I'm a little okay with that, but don't call me no more.
Right.
You know, because I don't
somebody
think you know, it just don't make sense for me to do this. I mean, let somebody else do it who can use that little chump change you're giving out. Because I mean, I don't think that we should be getting chump change. First of all, period. I don't care who you are, but if that's what you're going to do, then there are players in the city, real players in the city, that can use that money.
Right.
You know, at this point, I just say, I would rather just say, don't call me. You know.
They had two unions back then too, in the early '60s. They had the black union.
496. 496.
496 was for the brothers.
174.
174 for the dudes. And they merged in 1969. That's how long it took from 1960, when integration was, ruled, to 1969. That's when the two unions joined together. But it's all during that period of Bourbon Street.
Yeah, and it was that merger even had a lot to do with the fact that Gulfport, Mississippi, was in the early parts of the late '50s and early '60s, when Bourbon Street, New Orleans, not necessarily Bourbon Street, but even the red light district in the city, black musicians and white musicians, it was a law. You couldn't play together. Right. But there were guys that were going over to Gulfport, actually, not Biloxi, but Gulfport, and they were going over there, and the white musicians found out about these gigs, and these guys started going over there too, and they can go play with these black musicians, and that was, that started happening. The Gulfport Union got, because all these white musicians was go over there and they'll join the Gulfport Union, And they got, and it was even up until like maybe 5-6 years ago, when just before Deacon Jones took over the president of the union, that they found Gulfport tried to jack us. They tried to take our local from us because they said that 75% of your musicians are in our local, And it was, because those guys they kept their cards, all those years, all those old Italian guys, man, they kept their cards because they went to Gulfport because they wanted to play with some of these black musicians.
Interesting. Never heard that. We have time, I think, for a couple questions. If anyone wants to ask these guys about Bourbon Street and the world, go ahead.
You mentioned beer drinking, and I don't know if everybody knows what that is. What it was, the clubs would hire a girl to go up and ask a man to buy them a drink. And the bartender would pour the girl fake food colored, and
Right.
the guy would buy a drink. So it created.
Yeah, beer drinking, David asked a while ago what it was. Club owners would pay women to solicit male patrons to buy them drinks and buy themselves a drink. So the man's drink would be real, the woman's drink, so there was no charge. So for every drink that, they priced 2 drinks. The guy would pay for the girl's drink, which was water, and for the guy's drink. That's what beer drinking was. And I think it's a New Orleans, I don't know if that
New Orleans phenomenon.
that term, I don't think that term's used anywhere else as far as, but that's what beer
I've never
drinking
heard that term used, but that is, in my days of
come-
working service industry and,
It was
certain
it would be published
strip
in the
clubs
paper.
that still went on. I worked in a New York strip club as a waiter at one point, and that still went on, and they had it down to a science.
Did they call it beer drinking
They,
there?
they didn't call it bee drinking, because this was probably 89 or 90. That term had gone out of style. I don't remember what they called it. But
It was a big part of the revenue in the strip clubs
Yeah.
here, and it was, they printed in the paper, so-and-so was arrested for beer drinking
bee
by
drinking.
the Vice Squad.
but- Other questions?
George, you mentioned when you were playing the clubs, when you were paid for the week. I was wondering, did the band get tips? And if you did, were you dividing them, or you had to give them to the club owner?
Did the band get tips?
Yeah, were you?
Oh, absolutely.
You were able to keep tips on top of what you were paid?
Our tips were much better than the salary.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and yes, we did.
That's
We
good.
did split it. Yeah, it wasn't. I heard that there's guys today that the band leaders keeping the tips, Or he'll make the band leader gets double. No, well, we used to split it. In fact, I used to count the money. And because Art would be going to count to get the other money, and I would count the tip jar.
When I worked at the Playboy Club, you weren't allowed to put tip jars out.
Y'all wasn't put in, yeah.
It was a high-end place.
But y'all were getting probably paid better, though.
I think we're making $300 a week.
Yeah.
We're making good money because there's a corporation out of Chicago, and they paid good. But I always remember this union card. I think Mac didn't like that union card neither. And you'd be sitting there playing, a guy come up to you and say, "Let me see your card." And I said,
"Are you still in the union?"
I said, "Who the hell are you?" No.
No.
I said, "Who the hell are you?" He said, "I'm with the union." I said, "Oh, Lord."
Question. Grab the mic.
I probably shouldn't bring it up, but it did pique my curiosity. I'm curious about who owned Bourbon Street. It was really just one or two families? Is that, I never even heard of Bourbon Street being owned by anyone. It's funny. So what was the story? What's the story? Who is the family?
I believe it was two families. And it could, no, I don't have my card.
Me and George, we're not historians of the street and all, but
Yeah, no,
I can kind of shed a little light on that. I used to work at the Playboy Club. I'd take my break and go to La Louisiane restaurant next door.
Yeah,
And that was owned by Diamond Jim Moran.
yeah.
All right, and Diamond Jim used to be Al Capone's bodyguard when he was a kid, you know. So, you know, Diamond Jim and Carlos Marcellus and Caracci, you don't know who the hell owned what, but I know they had a good hold on that street.
Yeah.
That's why
serious
Garrison
hold.
got the big hard on to go after that street.
Oh, right. That's probably why it was so safe at times.
Bada bing.
Yeah,
So there was.
we don't want to have a big conversation about that.
So there was kind of an element, since you didn't want to talk about it, I didn't ask about it, but I'll ask now. There was an element of kind of organized crime, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got a great story. Let me tell you. I can tell you this one. This is funny. One night after we got off at the Ivanhoe, Johnny Cook came over to Art and told him, said, "I need y'all to come play a little set out at the place that on off of Causeway, that airplane. What was it called? Crash Landing. Crash Landing.
Yeah.
We want y'all to come play over at the Crash Landing." And like I think it was 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something like that. So Art said, "Okay," and he gave Art the address and stuff, and we all showed up at the Crash Landing. We were going to set up, and the guy met us at the door, big old huge guy. And he says, "All right, y'all know where the stage is?" I said, "Yeah." So we setting up, and he said, "Oh no, set up facing the wall." I'm really scared. Oh man, this is not good. This is not good. But we set up facing the stage, and the guy came up and said, "Y'all can start playing now, and don't make it too loud, but y'all can start playing." And we started playing, and about 40 minutes later, the guy came and said, "Y'all can go," But come to find out that some of the local families had a meeting, and they needed the music to cover up their meeting. We got paid more money for that performance than we would get for a month on Bourbon Street.
That's great. All right, anybody else questions? One more question. Gentleman over there.
This is a question for George, and this takes place outside of Bourbon Street. For those first couple records that you put out on Josie before you signed with Reprise, how wide was your touring area? Did you tour the whole U.S. or was it just regional?
When we started touring, we were more kind of central, up as far as Well, we got to New York, and I don't think we ever went past it. We did the Apollo Theater in New York, and that was about as far as we got up northeast. But we did all of the East Coast from everywhere, from anywhere in between Virginia and Mobile. That was kind of like the neighborhood that particular agency that we were with did really well.
All right, well,
One comment, today I was telling George.
can we get the microphone? Who's got the mic? Sounds like a rap song. Who's got the mic?
Who's got the mic? I've had the fortunate. Okay, sorry.
Now you're back.
I just wanted to mention that today on Bourbon Street, on the off nights, on Monday and Tuesday night, some of the best musicians in New Orleans are playing down there to supplement their regular income. Especially, you have Billy Gregory from It's a Beautiful Day playing, Mondays and Tuesdays down there. Austin Seacard, Clemens, Mike Lemler, who plays with George on a regular basis, is down there on Mondays and Tuesdays. And Bourbon Street, it is cover music, most of it is, but truly, it's still a support system for a lot of the musicians to make up for what, for incomes that are not equal to the rest of the country. So Bourbon Street gets sold short now, but there is a scene down there on some of the off nights where you can hear some pretty good musicianship. That's all I wanted to say.
There's still great musicians playing.
Yeah, and also and
there's traditional music too.
That young man is like another one of New Orleans. He should have been on this panel. He probably knows what Dave Ferraro. He's real deal.
He's collaborating what I'm
He's
saying.
collaborating.
Thank you all very much for coming. We got to roll. Out. George Porter, Wacko Wade.